What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In our last video, we went over the backend implementation for following and unfollowing people. In this video, we're going to be going over how to update our user stats or user statistics. So we want to be able to update the amount of followers that they have and following that they have. And we also want to make these things clickable and display the list of those people that we are following or are followers, right? So we're going to start this video off with how to implement this sort of user stats feature with our posts, followers, and following. So what I want us to do to start this off, guys, is go back to our user model, and we're going to add another property to this. So I'm going to create another struct here, and it's going to be called user stats. And we are just going to make this have three properties, right? We're going to make it the post count, the followers count, and the following count. So let's go ahead and just add those three properties. We're going to say var following count, int var post or followers count, int var posts count, int, right? So then we are going to add this user stats property to our user struct. And there is a couple different ways of doing this, guys. You could add it as a property to like the user sort of body here, or we could do it similarly to what we did with our isFollowed guy here. And that's what we're going to do. And I'll explain some of the different ways you could implement this once we get into the backend side of things. So I'm going to say var user or var stats is an optional user stats, right? And theoretically, this doesn't have to be optional, right? You could just default it to 0. But once again, we'll go over why we do it this way in a little bit. I'll talk about some alternatives, and you guys can pick the whatever suits your needs best or whatever makes the most sense to you. And I'll talk about why I implemented this way to give you the pros and cons side of things. So we're going to make this codable and hashable, guys. And next up, we are going to go over where to drop this information in, and then we're going to go over how to actually retrieve this information from our database relative to each user so that we can display it in each user's profile. So what we want to do, guys, is go up to our profile folder, view, profile header view. So this is where we have all of these hard-coded values, right? So now what we can do is just say user.stats.postCount, right? And here we can say user.stats.followersCount, and here we can say user.stats.followingCount. And you guys are going to notice all of these are optional, and that makes it a little bit annoying to deal with. And all we have to do is give each guy a default value of 0 here. That's one way of doing it. Another way would be to follow the pattern we used up here, where we, implement like a computed property and give it a default value. So here's what that would look like. We could say private var user stat or stats, user stats return user.stats. No, if it's not there, just .init 000. And here we can go and say stats.postCount, stats.followersCount, stats.followingCount. So just shows you guys a couple different ways of doing things. Let's go ahead and run this to see if it's working. We should just see 0 for all of those values now, guys. So we go here, we see 0, 0, 0. Something I noticed that Instagram does is that they lower the opacity of these things if they're 0. So let's go ahead and see if we can implement that now. So we can go back to our user stat view. We haven't been there in a while. Jump to definition. Let me remove this. And guys, we can go here and say .opacity, value equals 0, yes, 0.5, no, 1.0. So basically it's saying if the value is 0, we're going to lower the opacity. If it's not 0, we'll bring it back to life essentially and give it the full color. And it's just going to like indicate to the user like, hey, this thing is like disabled kind of if it's 0. We can't click on that, right? So you you guys notice that those are, grayed out kind of. And when we implement the functionality to actually click on these things to go and view the list of people relative to that particular stat, that when they're grayed out like this, we're going to make it so that they're not clickable to sort of reinforce that functionality there, just to enhance our user experience. It's little touches like that that make big differences in your application and your overall user experience, guys. And that's the level of quality we bring to you here at AppStuff. But anyway, now let's go over how we can fetch these user stats from our database. So we're going to go back to our user service, and we are going to implement another extension and another section here. So I'm going to make a mark. This one's for user stats, extension, user service. So this is starting to get into why this is like beneficial to make these extensions, guys, because as I'm starting to go through my file now, it's getting kind of large, right? So here I can go and see that, hey, this section is all of the stuff for my following code. And this section is all the stuff for my stats code. And, you can make another section or mark here for like, hey, this is to fetch things. And it just really helps organize your file and your code in general to make it easier to work on as the file gets larger. And if anybody else ever came and looked at your code, if you're working with a team, they will absolutely love you for how clean and concise and easy to read your code is. So just another pro tip there. But anyway, guys, this user service function we're going to call is going to be called fetch user stats. And we're going to look at a particular UID, and it's going to return asynchronously this user stats object. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. Let's talk about what we need to do in our database to get this done. So basically, guys, I'll go to my completed guy. We are going to go into this followers collection, go to the user right here, and then just return the count of this document snapshot. So obviously here, this would give me back 3. So this particular user has 3 followers, right? So another alternative, I did say that we were going to discuss an alternative to having to do this, would be to update or add like a stats property on your user object. You could do that and, keep track of the user's stats that way. And it makes your fetching and retrieving these stats much easier because they'll always just be readily available on your user object. But it does involve a little bit more back-end complexity, right? So this is where I'm showing you guys the different ways of doing things, right? So basically, the alternative, what I was talking about just now, would be like keeping track of the user stats, like their post count, their follower count and stuff, just like we did with the likes here on our post object. But, that involves an additional database, right? So basically, every time you follow someone, you would have to go and update this structure, and the user structure, right? So it's just an additional database, right? Whereas, if you guys don't want to do that, then we could implement, the additional read here for going and getting all of our users' stuff from their collection and counting it. So it's a trade-off either way. It just really depends on what you guys prefer and what the situation with your app is like, right? So like for example, you're writing a lot of information to your database. You don't want to introduce that additional write and increase the cost of your writes to your database. When I say write, I mean uploading information to it. Say that you have too many database reads going on, you might want to implement this the other way, like we did with the post likes feature, to reduce the amount of reads or data pulls that you're executing on your API. So it really just depends on the needs of your application. They both accomplish the same thing. But anyway, guys, let's go ahead and see how we can implement this now that I've given you that explanation. So we're going to say async let following snapshot equal try await Firebase constants dot following collection dot document UID dot collection user dash following dot get documents. And let's just add our indentations like so. And then we are going to say let following count equal try await following snapshot dot count. And we are going to copy this for our followers snapshot. Just make sure you change everything. Followers collection, user dash followers. And we're going to say let follower count. And make sure you guys change this guy as well. Follower snapshot.count. Okay. The post guy is going to be a little bit different. We are going to do it like this. We're going to say async let post snapshot equal try await Firebase constants dot post collection dot where field is equal to, and you're going to look at the owner UID is equal to our UID. So it's pretty much the same thing as fetching our user posts. We're just going to look at the snapshot.count here. .get documents, return.init, following count, following posts. This is following count, followers count, and post count. Oh, we need that post count. So we're going to say let posts count equal, what's it called? Posts snapshot.count. Okay, so a couple things we need to unpack here, right? Let's see. Okay, yeah, we need to say try awaits. So why are we using this async let stuff? So this gets into more of the advanced like Swift concurrency stuff, guys. Basically, the reasoning is that, like I said before, we don't want to have to wait until one of these finishes before we go to the next process, right? So basically what this is doing is it's asynchronously fetching all of this data and storing it in these properties whenever it comes back. We don't care about the order that these things are retrieved in, only that they're all fetched and that we ultimately return them when we get them back. So just a quick fix, guys. We actually need to make this a followers count. Yes, follower count, just like that. So just make sure all these things line up. Following snapshot, make sure the following count uses that count. Follower snapshot, post. Okay, so this is looking good. Now we just need to see where we need to call this function. So let's go into our profile view model and let's add another function here called fetch user stats. We're just going to execute a task and we're going to say self.user.stats equals, what's it called? Let's see, user service dot fetch user stats user dot ID, and we need to say try await here. So let's go ahead and run this, guys, and see if that is giving us back our user stats. So I'm going to go here, go to Ironman, and it doesn't look like it. So he should have one person in his list right there. So let's just go ahead and make sure all of our information looks good back in our user service function. So let's see. So he should have a follower, right? So let's just make sure all this information is good. Let me run this again just to make sure there's no kinks. Following count, follower count, post count. Yep, that's all looking good. So we go back to Ironman. Yeah, for some reason it is not saying that he has a follower, but it's listing or saying here that we're following him, right? So we notice here that that's not working there either. Okay, so we have an error here. Let's see if we can debug this and figure it out together, guys. So in our profile view model, wow, that is why I'm not calling the function. I am an idiot. Sometimes it's way simpler to fix than you think. All right, so let's go ahead and go and see Ironman. We see that it updates to 1. If I go to my profile, we see that it updates to 2 1 there, and that I have 2 posts. Something interesting that I do want us to show you guys, though, is I want us to add print statements to when this fetch user stats guy is called, and we're going to see something interesting happening here. So if we go to our user service, let's go ahead and say print debug stats, did call fetch user stats. right? You can add that anywhere in the function. We just want to keep track of how many times this function is getting called. So let's run this again, and we're going to see something interesting here. So I'm going to go to Ironman's profile, and you guys are going to notice this function gets called twice.
But something interesting is that it only gets called once if we go to our current user profile. So the interesting thing to note here is we are executing 2 API calls when we navigate to a user's profile. But when we go to our current user profile, we only execute 1. So this indicates to me that this is not a problem with how we've written our networking layer or the code that interacts with our API, but something is up with how things work within the Swift UI framework. So when we're navigating to this thing, the way we have our code set up is that it's calling that function twice. And that's something that we don't want, right? Because that means that every API call that is getting made in this profile view is getting called twice, which is bad, right? That is literally doubling our network call or our database reads every time we go to a user profile. And you could imagine right now we only have 2 API calls happening. We're checking the user stats and checking if the user is followed. What if we had 10 network calls, right? Where we got to fetch the post, the following, and a bunch of other stuff, then, this problem becomes worse and worse as our networking increases in this component of our application. So we're going to be going over why that's happening in the next video, guys, and implement a bug fix before we move on to being able to view the user's followers and all of their user relationships, really. So we'll be able to click on one of these guys and view all of the people that are related to that list. So get excited for that, guys. We will see you there. Thanks for watching this one. Peace out.